Sullivan's diner reeked of burnt coffee and broken dreams. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and Ava Mitchell wiped the same stain on the counter again and again for the third time, watching the rag spin in pointless circles. It didn't lift the discoloration. It didn't lift her exhaustion. And it certainly didn't lift the fact that her rent was 2 weeks late. The fluorescent light overhead flickered with its familiar buzzing hum, casting pale shadows across a row of red vinyl booths worn down by decades. Outside, rain lashed the window, turning the Brooklyn street into a smeared streak of neon and darkness. Her feet ached. Everything ached. The kind of tired that seeped all the way into bone. The tired of someone working double shifts 6 days a week. The tired of smiling at men who snapped their fingers to summon her like a dog. The tired of pretending she couldn't hear the filthy comments, spoken just loud enough to make her feel small. Ava was invisible here, just a waitress in a stained apron. A face people looked through instead of looking at. The doorbell rang. She didn't look up right away. Why would she? It was always the same. Drunks hunting coffee. Lonely souls looking for the companionship of fluorescent light. Taxi drivers killing time between fares. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the sudden silence that fell over the 3 scattered customers in the diner. Maybe it was the way the air seemed to thicken, heavier, like it was charged before a storm. When Ava finally lifted her eyes, her breath caught. 3 men stood in the doorway, rainwater dripping from their expensive coats, the kind that probably cost more than 6 months of her wages put together. But it was the man in the middle who froze her hand against the countertop. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair slicked back from a face that looked carved from marble. Handsome in a dangerous, untouchable way. The kind of beauty that made you think of fallen angels and Greek tragedy. His suit was flawless. Charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that whispered money, old money, blood money. The 2 men flanking him were clearly bodyguards. Ava had seen enough movies to recognize the curve of a gun holster under a suit jacket, the way their eyes swept the room with machine-like precision, mapping exits and threats. They moved like predators, but they moved because of him. He walked straight to the last booth, the shadowed corner that could watch both the front door and the kitchen. Of course, men like him didn't sit with their backs to the world. His cologne reached her before he did, something dark and expensive. Something that didn't belong in a place that stank of grease and desperation, bergamot, leather, and something she couldn't name. But it made her pulse quicken in a treacherous way. Coffee. One of the 2 bodyguards said it. Not a question. A statement. Ava nodded, lifting the coffee pot with hands that trembled in a way she didn't want to admit. As she neared their table, she kept her eyes down. A survival instinct she had learned young. Don't stare too long. Don't make yourself memorable. Don't exist more than necessary. And yet, she could feel his gaze on her like a physical touch. Rough night, huh? His voice was low, smooth, with the faint trace of a foreign lilt. Italian, maybe, or something older, more refined. Ava poured coffee into 3 cups, watching the black liquid spiral and settle. Every night is rough at 3 o'clock in the morning. A mistake. She shouldn't have answered. She shouldn't have let exhaustion make her forget the unwritten rules. When she finally looked up, his eyes were on her, gray as storm clouds, as gunmetal, as something both beautiful and lethal. There was an intensity there that made her want to step back, but Ava stood frozen, pinned like a butterfly to velvet. How long have you worked here? And something in his tone suggested this wasn't small talk. This was information gathering. Long enough. She set the pot down and turned to leave. Wait. Ava shouldn't have stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to hold on to her precious anonymity, the thing that protected people like her from people like him. But her body betrayed her. Her feet rooted themselves to the cracked linoleum. What's your name? Ava, she whispered, and regretted it instantly, giving him even that small piece of herself. He smiled. Just the slight curve of his mouth, not reaching his eyes, and somehow it made him look even more ruthless. Ava, he repeated, tasting her name the way you tasted wine. I am. I know who you are, Ava cut in, and immediately wanted to swallow her tongue, because she did know. Who in this neighborhood didn't? Luca Moretti. The Moretti family controlled everything from the docks to Midtown. Gambling, construction, restaurants, and the things people didn't mention in polite places. His father had built an empire. Luca had turned it into a kingdom. Ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. And she had just admitted she knew exactly who he was. His expression shifted. Surprise, then something darker, more calculating. Interesting. And you're not afraid. Ava was terrified. Her heart slammed so hard she was sure he could hear it. But she lifted her chin anyway, calling up every stubborn scrap of pride her aunt had forged into her blood. Should I be afraid? Most people are. Most people are probably smarter than I am. That smile appeared again, wider this time. One of the bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to hearing anyone speak to their boss with anything other than trembling reverence. But Luca only leaned back, studying her with those storm-gray eyes, as if she were a puzzle he intended to solve. "Go back to work, Ava," he said at last, dismissing her with a flick of his hand. The ring on his finger caught the fluorescent light, gold and black onyx. Ava fled, back behind the counter, trying to steady her breathing, forcing her hands to stop shaking as she refilled the sugar caddy and pretended she couldn't feel his eyes following her. The other customers were gone. Somehow. Smart people knew when to make themselves invisible. Now it was only her, Luca Moretti, his 2 bodyguards, and Earl the overnight cook, who was very deliberately ignoring everything happening in the dining room. 20 minutes passed. 30. They didn't leave. Luca kept making calls in rapid Italian, his low voice vibrating in Ava's chest even from across the room. The bodyguard stayed silent and alert, occasionally murmuring into a phone or an earpiece. Ava was restocking the napkin dispenser when the doorbell rang again. This time the energy was different. Wrong. 2 men walked in, and everything about them screamed danger. Not the controlled, calculated danger of Luca Moretti. This was something wilder, more desperate. The first was tall and lean, with a scar running from his temple down to his jaw. The second was shorter and thick-set, with dead eyes, the kind of eyes that belonged to men who had crossed lines they could never come back from. They didn't sit. They didn't order. They just stood near the door, hands in their coat pockets. Luca's bodyguards tensed instantly, hands moving toward their suit jackets. Luca went completely still. The kind of stillness that came before violence, before thunder, before the world split open. "Moretti," the scarred man spoke, his voice heavy with an Eastern European accent, unmistakably Ukrainian. "You've been hard to find. On purpose, Victor." Luca's voice was ice. "You're not welcome in my city." "Your city?" Victor laughed, but there wasn't a shred of humor in it. "Your father's city, maybe, but the old man is dead, and you're just a kid playing dress-up in your daddy's suit." The tension spiked so fast Ava couldn't breathe. This was a challenge, a threat, and she was trapped right in the middle of it. "Leave," Luca said softly. "While you still can. We're here with a message from Moscow. They're not happy about the shipment you stopped. They want—" Ava didn't hear the rest, because she saw it, the flash of metal as Alexei, the shorter one, drew a gun from inside his coat. Time slowed, crystallizing into separate, horrific moments. The gun came up. Luca's bodyguards reached for their weapons. Alexei's finger tightened on the trigger, and Ava was moving. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She didn't weigh the fact that she was only a waitress, that she should duck, hide, let these men handle the violence that belonged to their world. She only saw the gun aimed at that booth, at Luca Moretti, at the man who had looked at her like she could be seen, and her body reacted. Ava lunged across the space between the counter and his table, both hands grabbing the expensive fabric of his suit, yanking him down with everything she had. With all her strength, all her desperation, all her terror fed by adrenaline, they tumbled beneath the table just as the first shot ripped through the air. The bullet slammed into the back of the vinyl booth, right where his head had been a second earlier. The stuffing exploded into a cloud of foam and torn fabric. Another shot. Luca's bodyguards fired back. The diner erupted into chaos, violence, and the sharp, biting stink of gunpowder. But under the table, pressed to the sticky floor with Luca Moretti's body over hers, protective, possessive, Ava felt only the frantic pounding of 2 hearts, the hot breath of him against her neck, and the horrifying realization that she had just saved the life of a monster. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers sliding into her hair with a tenderness that didn't make sense. Against her ear, his voice went rough and trembling. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Would Ava escape the dangerous world of Luca Moretti? Or would she be bound forever to the man who saw her when no one else did? The story continues. If your heart is racing with every line, press like so this story can spread. Share it now with a friend who loves dramatic love stories. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you won't miss the next surprising parts. The gunfire kept cracking above their heads, ripping through the air, hammering into walls, into glass, into everything. Ava squeezed her eyes shut and pressed her face to Luca's chest, feeling his heart pound wildly beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. The sharp sting of gunpowder mixed with his cologne, becoming something both deadly and intoxicating. Then, abruptly, it all stopped. The last shot rang out, followed by hurried footsteps, a door slamming hard, an engine roaring out on the street, and then fading, fading until only a silence remained, thick as clotted blood. Luca didn't rush to get up. He stayed there a few seconds longer, his body still shielding Ava completely, his gray eyes sweeping the room through the narrow gap beneath the table. Only when one of the two bodyguards spoke, tense but controlled, did he slowly lift himself. "Boss, they're gone." Victor took a shoulder hit. Alexei dragged him to the car. "They won't get far." Luca nodded, then turned to Ava, who was still curled on the sticky floor. He held his hand out, palm up, waiting. She stared at that hand the way you stared at a trap, but her legs wouldn't listen, and she couldn't stand without something to hold on to. She took his hand, and Luca pulled her upright with a gentleness that surprised her, as if she were something fragile, something that needed to be handled with care. When she was standing, Ava finally saw the full extent of the destruction. The diner looked like it had been through a bombing. Bullet holes pocked the walls, shattered glass littered the floor. Blood. There was blood somewhere, she wasn't sure whose. The vinyl booth where Luca had been sitting was nothing but torn stuffing. If she'd been a second late, just 1 second, his head would have been there instead of that pile of cotton. Luca watched her, his gaze sliding from the top of her head down to her feet, checking, assessing. "Are you hurt?" Ava shook her head, though the truth was she wasn't sure. Her whole body was numb, adrenaline still buzzing through her veins, masking any pain if there was any. Luca turned to his bodyguards, his voice returning to ice. "Clean this place up. Find Earl. Give him enough money to forget tonight. Contact the building owner. Buy it if you have to. I want this place shut down indefinitely for structural damage." The bodyguard nodded and immediately moved to carry it out. Luca looked back at Ava, and there was something in his eyes that made her want to step back. Not danger, not the ruthlessness she'd seen earlier. Determination. Absolute. Unmovable. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer. It was an order. Ava blinked, not sure she'd heard him right. What?" "They saw your face." Luca stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "They saw you pull me down, save my life. In my world, that means you picked a side, and now you're a target. I didn't pick any side." Ava heard her own voice shaking, but she forced herself to hold steady. I didn't think. I just acted. That doesn't matter." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a complicated equation. "Victor Kozlov doesn't care about why. He only cares about what you did, and what you did made you his enemy. Then I'll go somewhere, leave the city, disappear." Luca let out a short laugh, but there wasn't a trace of humor in it. "You think you can run from Victor Kozlov? He's got people everywhere. You won't live a week." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. "So what am I supposed to do?" Luca looked at her, and in that moment she saw something soft flicker in those storm eyes before it vanished, replaced by the familiar hardness. "You come with me, under my protection, until I deal with Victor. I don't belong to anyone. You belonged to me the moment you chose my life over your own safety." He said it like an obvious fact, like the sun rose in the east, like water flowed to the sea. There was no room for argument, no room for refusal. Outside, a sleek black SUV screeched to a stop in front of the diner, headlights cutting through the rain that was still pouring down. Luca placed a hand on Ava's back, gentle but firm, guiding her toward the door. "Let's go." And Ava, the girl who had spent her whole life becoming invisible, stepped out of the ruined diner beside the most powerful Mafia boss in New York, not knowing her life would never be the same again. The rain kept pouring as if the sky were crying for her fate. Ava climbed into the black SUV, and the moment the door shut behind her with that heavy, final thud, she knew she'd just stepped into a completely different world. The interior was upholstered in cream leather, so soft she was afraid her stained apron would dirty it. The windows were black and thick enough that she knew at once they were bulletproof, a vehicle designed to protect the life inside it, or to hide what happened inside it from the world's eyes. Luca slid in beside her, the distance between them on the back seat only a few inches, yet it felt like an entire chasm. He pulled out his phone and started making calls in Italian, quick and sharp, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to giving orders and being obeyed without questions. Ava didn't understand what he was saying, but she caught the repeated words, the names, the clipped commands. He was rearranging his world, and somehow she had become part of it. The SUV glided through the wet streets of Brooklyn, past bars already closed, convenience stores with flickering neon, past the dark alleys where she'd walked home every night after her shift. Her old life slid by outside the glass like a movie someone was fast-forwarding. Then they climbed onto the Manhattan Bridge, and the city's skyline rose in front of her like a painting inlaid with a million lights. New York at night, glittering and promising, that light Ava had only ever watched from far away, from the other side of the river, from the position of an outsider. She looked down at her hands, still trembling, still carrying the smell of coffee and fried grease. Only an hour earlier she had been wiping down a counter, worrying about overdue rent, trying to survive one more long night. Now she was sitting in an armored car with a Mafia boss, crossing the Manhattan Bridge toward the Upper East Side, a place she'd never set foot in during all 27 years of living in this city. The car stopped in front of a stately old building, the kind of pre-war architecture Ava had only seen in movies or on the pages of magazines she flipped through while waiting for customers. A man in uniform opened the car door for them, his face blank, showing no surprise or curiosity at the sight of a waitress in a stained apron stepping out beside Luca Moretti, the professionalism of someone paid not to see anything. The lobby was vast, its ceiling soaring high, a crystal chandelier spilling warm gold light onto a marble floor. Everything here radiated an elegant age, a kind of wealth that had endured for generations, not the showy kind of the newly rich. Luca led her to the elevator, one bodyguard moving ahead, the other behind. She was enclosed, protected, or imprisoned. She wasn't sure there was a difference. The elevator stopped, and when the doors opened, Ava realized it opened directly into the apartment. No hallway, no door. This entire floor was a single space, a penthouse. She stepped out, and her breath caught in her throat. The apartment stretched before her like a dream, or a nightmare dressed in money. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over all of Central Park, the city's millions of lights glittering below like a carpet woven from stars. The furnishings were minimalist, yet so expensive she could feel it. Charcoal gray sofas, a glass table with black metal legs, paintings on the walls that she suspected were originals, not prints. Everything was in cool tones, gray, black, deep navy, as if the penthouse had been designed to mirror the soul of the man who owned it. Beautiful, perfect, and so cold it felt lonely. Ava stood there, rainwater still dripping from her hair onto the polished wood floor, feeling like a stain in the middle of this sterile perfection. She didn't belong here. Everything in this apartment screamed that she didn't belong here. Luca stopped beside her, watching her reaction with an expression she couldn't read. The guest room is down that hallway. Second door on the left. His voice was low and even. You'll find everything you need inside. Clothes, personal items, get some rest. We'll talk in the morning. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of another corridor, leaving Ava standing alone in the luxurious penthouse, feeling like a small bird that had just been trapped inside a gilded cage. Ava couldn't sleep. She lay on the massive bed in the unfamiliar guest room, staring up at the soaring ceiling, listening to the city echo from dozens of floors below. This bed was softer than anything she'd ever lain on, the sheets cool and smooth as water, yet she felt as if she were lying on stone. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash of a gun barrel, heard bullets tearing through air, felt the weight of Luca's body pinning her down. When dawn began to blush the Manhattan horizon beyond the glass, she gave up on trying to sleep and sat up. In daylight, the room was even more overwhelming than it had been the night before. The sun exposed every luxurious detail the darkness had hidden. When she opened the closet, it was filled with clothes still bearing tags, in every size, every style, from silk sleepwear to cocktail dresses, from premium jeans to cashmere sweaters. The bathroom was lined with white marble, with a tub big enough for 3 people, and bottles of cosmetics with labels she'd only ever seen in advertisements. Someone had prepared all of this. For her, as if they'd known she would come, as if her being here had been planned in advance. She traded her stained apron for something simple from the closet, jeans and a cream sweater, then stepped out of the room. The penthouse was unnervingly quiet in the morning, sunlight pouring through the enormous windows. Yet it didn't melt the cold that clung to every corner. She walked down the hallway, searching for Luca, searching for answers, searching for a way out. She found him in a room that looked like an office, seated behind a massive dark wood desk, 3 computer monitors glowing in front of him, a phone pressed to his ear. He'd changed, light gray suit with a white shirt and no tie, looking as if last night had never happened, as if he hadn't nearly died only hours ago. When he saw her in the doorway, he spoke a few quick words in Italian and hung up. Sleep well. In this situation, it sounded like a taunt. I need to go home, Ava said, forcing her voice steady. I've got a job. I've got a life. I can't stay here. Luca leaned back in his chair, watching her with an expression she couldn't decode. You don't have a job anymore. Sullivan's Diner is closed indefinitely for structural safety. Earl got enough money to retire early and forget everything he saw. He paused, letting the words sink in. Your things from your apartment are being moved here. This month's rent has been paid, and your landlord was happy to terminate the lease early for generous compensation. Ava felt the floor tilt beneath her. You don't have the right to do that. I've got every right. His voice didn't rise, wasn't angry. It was simply truth stated with absolute certainty. And I did. For your safety. For my safety. She stepped into the room, anger boiling in her chest. You destroyed my life in one night and call that for my safety. Viktor Kozlov wants you dead. Luka stood, came around the desk, and walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. He saw your face. He saw you save me. In his world, that can't be ignored. If you go back to your old apartment, you'll die. If you go back to the diner, you'll die. If you try to run, you'll die. The only choice that keeps you alive is staying here, under my protection. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. What's the difference? Luka stopped right in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat rising off his body, close enough to see the darker flecks in his storm eyes. The difference is, I don't want to cage you. I want to keep you alive. Ava wanted to scream, wanted to punch that perfect, infuriating face, wanted to run out of this penthouse and never look back. But she knew he was right. She'd seen Viktor Kozlov's eyes, the eyes of someone who didn't know mercy. She'd seen the way Alexei drew his gun without hesitation. This was their world, and she'd stumbled into it, and now she didn't know how to step back out. How long? Her voice was barely a whisper. Until I deal with Viktor. Until you're safe. And if that never happens... Luka didn't answer. He only looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, then turned back toward his desk, leaving her standing there with the crushing awareness that the life she'd known was over, and she had no say in it. On the second night in Luca Moretti's penthouse, Ava still couldn't sleep. She'd tried everything. Counting sheep, deep breathing, reading a book she'd found on the shelf. Nothing worked. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind went back to gunfire, to the bite of gunpowder, to the sticky floor against her back, and the weight of Luca's body pressing her down. When the wall clock struck 4 o'clock in the morning, she gave up on lying in bed and stepped out of the room, barefoot on the ice-cold wood floor, moving toward the enormous glass doors that looked out over Central Park. She didn't expect to find him there. Luca stood in front of the glass, his back to her, his silhouette cut in black against the city's night sky. He wore only black sleep pants, his upper body bare, and for the first time Ava saw what was hidden beneath his perfect suits. Tattoos covered his back and both arms. Intricate designs, Italian religious symbols, images of lions and eagles, lines of Latin she couldn't understand. But it wasn't only tattoos. There were scars too, so many scars. Long, short, old, new, crisscrossing his skin like a map of violence and survival. She drew in a sharp breath, and Luca turned. His eyes didn't show surprise at seeing her. Only exhaustion, the kind she recognized because she carried it. Too. The kind sleep couldn't cure. Can't sleep either. Ava shook her head and came a little closer, stopping a few steps away, looking out with him at the city spread below. Central Park was a dark patch in a sea of lights, like an abyss surrounded by millions of artificial stars. I don't remember the last time I slept well, Luca said, his voice low and distant. Maybe when I was a kid, before I understood how the world really works. Silence drifted between them. Not heavy, just the quiet of two people sharing the dark. Why were you at Sullivan's that night? The question slipped out of Ava's mouth before she could think. There are hundreds of restaurants in this city that are more upscale. Why a rundown diner in Brooklyn at 3 o'clock in the morning? Luca didn't answer right away. He kept staring out the glass, and Ava thought he'd ignore her. But then he spoke, so softly she had to lean in to hear. My father used to take me there when I was little. Ava blinked, unable to hide her surprise. Before he became the man everyone was afraid of. Before the empire, before the power, before all of this. Luca tipped his head slightly toward the luxurious penthouse around them. He was just an Italian immigrant working at the docks, and I was just a kid. On nights he didn't have a late shift. He'd wake me up and tell me we were going on a secret adventure, and he'd take me to Sullivan's. We'd sit at that corner table. He'd order pancakes for me with lots of syrup, and he'd tell me stories about Italy, about family, about the dreams he had for the future. Luca paused, his jaw tightening. That was the only place he was just my father. Not Don Moretti. Not the man the whole city feared. Just Papa. He's gone, Ava asked softly, even though she already knew the answer from what Viktor had said that night, 3 years ago. Heart attack. A bitter laugh scraped out of Luca's throat. Not a bullet. Not an enemy. Not betrayal. just his heart deciding to stop after 70 years of carrying too much. "I'm sorry. Don't." Luca turned to look at her, and in the dim city light filtering through the glass, she saw something she hadn't expected in his storm eyes. Pain, loneliness, the vulnerability of an orphaned child hidden inside the body of a monster. He built this empire on blood, taught me that power is the only thing that matters, that feelings are weakness. But every night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I still go to Sullivan's. I sit at that corner table, drink the worst coffee in the city, and try to feel him again. Ava didn't know what to say. She'd thought of Luca Moretti as a monster, someone who ruled through fear and violence. She hadn't expected that beneath the steel shell was a man still grieving his father, still reaching for warmth in memories that were fading. "Then you showed up," Luca continued, his voice shifting, turning softer. "A tired waitress with not enough money to pay rent, who dared to look me in the eye and not shake. And then you threw yourself in front of a bullet for me. A stranger, a monster, yet you knew exactly who I was." He shook his head, as if he still couldn't believe it. "In my entire life, no one has ever done that. Chosen my life over their own safety, and asked for nothing in return." "I didn't think," Ava whispered. "I just acted." "I know." And for the first time since they'd met, she saw something like tenderness in his eyes. "That's why I can't let anything happen to you." The next morning, Ava woke to sunlight spilling through the glass and the rich scent of coffee drifting into the room. She couldn't remember when she'd returned to bed. She couldn't remember when she'd finally slipped into sleep after her conversation with Luca by the window. But last night had been the first night she slept without the echo of gunfire haunting her. When she stepped out of the room, she found a middle-aged woman setting a breakfast tray on the table in the living room. The woman had silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, warm brown eyes, and the gentle smile of a grandmother from a fairy tale. "You must be Ava," the woman said, her voice carrying a soft Italian lilt. "I'm Rosa. I manage Mr. Moretti's household. He told me to make sure you've got everything you need." Ava nodded awkwardly, unaccustomed to being served, unaccustomed to kindness from a stranger. "Your things have arrived," Rosa continued, pouring a cup of coffee and setting it in front of Ava. "I've put everything away in the closet in your room. And Mr. Moretti left this for you." She handed Ava a thick black folder, heavy with paperwork inside. Ava frowned, opened it, and the world beneath her feet collapsed for the second time in 3 days. They were bills. Bills stamped paid. Student loans, paid. Credit cards, paid. An overdue phone bill, paid. And at the bottom, stacked like stones that had been crushing her chest for 2 years, were invoices from Mount Sinai Hospital, chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, intensive care, pain medication, numbers with 7 digits that she'd stared at every night, not knowing how she'd ever pay them off in the rest of her life. Every single one stamped with the same words, paid. Ava stood up so fast the chair screeched across the wood floor, and she went straight to Luca's office. She didn't knock. She shoved the door open and walked in, the folder shaking in her hands with rage. Luca was seated behind his desk, a phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her, he spoke a few quick words and hung up, rising to his feet, gray eyes sweeping over her face with caution. "What is this?" Ava threw the folder onto his desk, her voice trembling with restraint. "What did you do?" "I paid your debts." "You don't have the right," she shouted, losing control, 2 years of exhaustion and grief exploding in a single moment. "You don't have the right to touch my life like that. These are my debts, my responsibility." "You saved my life," Luca said, his voice calm, as if she hadn't just screamed in his face. "In my world, that kind of debt is sacred. I don't need you to pay anything for me. I don't need your pity." "This isn't pity. Then what is it?" Ava stepped closer, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. "What do you think you know about me? You think you can buy me with money? I know enough." Luca stepped closer too, and now they were only an arm's length apart. "I know you're 27, orphaned at 19 when your mother died in a car accident. I know you raised your sister alone for 6 years since she was 15, working 3 jobs at once just to keep you both afloat. I know your sister, Sophie, was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 4 years ago, and you spent every penny you earned, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, fighting for her." His voice lowered, softer, like he was touching a wound that hadn't healed. "And I know she died 2 years ago, leaving you with a mountain of debt and a shattered heart." Ava went rigid. "You know about Sophie. I know everything about you, Ava Mitchell." The anger inside her dissolved, replaced by something far more painful, something she'd buried for 2 years beneath the mask of a strong woman, a self-sufficient girl, someone who didn't need anyone. Her eyes began to burn, and she bit down on her lip, trying to stop the tears threatening to spill. She was all I had. Ava's voice broke, unable to hold itself together anymore. Sophie was the only reason I got up every morning. And when she was gone, a sob tore free, then another. And suddenly Ava was crying, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. 2 years of contained grief, bursting like a dam breaking. When she was gone, I didn't know what I was living for anymore. I just worked, paid debt, worked, paid debt, like a machine. No one saw me. No one knew I existed. I was just a shadow passing through other people's lives. Luca stood there in silence, watching her fall apart in front of him. Then he did something she didn't expect. He stepped closer, lifted his hand, and gently touched her cheek, his thumb wiping away her tears. "You're not invisible," he said, his voice low and certain. "Not to me." Ava looked up, red-rimmed eyes meeting those storm-gray eyes, and in that moment, in a room flooded with morning light, among bills stamped, paid, and wounds that still hadn't healed, she whispered something she'd never said to anyone. "I want to stop being invisible." And Luca, the ruthless Mafia boss, the man the whole city feared, looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, and spoke so softly it was almost a vow. "You'll never be invisible again. I promise." The days that followed drifted by in a strange silence. Luca disappeared into his work. Endless phone calls. Meetings with men whose faces were cold as stone. Night trips he didn't explain. And Ava didn't ask about. She wandered the penthouse like a ghost, exploring every corner of the gilded cage she'd been locked inside. And she found the library. It was at the end of the east hallway, with bookshelves that ran from floor to ceiling, packed with every kind of book. Philosophy, history, classic literature, even volumes of Italian poetry she couldn't read. Ava sat there for hours, her fingers gliding over spines, trying to understand the man who owned this room through the books he read. Rosa found her there on the afternoon of the 4th day, carrying a tray of tea and freshly baked cookies. "He has read a lot since he was a child," Rosa said, setting the tray on the table beside Ava and taking the chair across from her. Books were his only refuge. Ava looked up at the older woman, curiosity in her eyes. "How long have you worked for the Moretti family?" 32 years. Rosa poured tea into 2 cups, the faint scent of bergamot drifting through the air. "I started when Luca was 4, a serious little boy with eyes far too old for his age. Was he always like that? Cold and distant?" Rosa paused, her brown eyes going far away, as if she were searching through memory. "No, not always. When he was very small, Luca was a child who laughed easily. He liked running in the garden. He liked bedtime stories. He liked wrapping his arms around his mother when he woke in the morning." She stopped, drawing in a slow breath. But Don Antonio, his father, didn't accept softness. He believed that to rule this empire, his son had to become a weapon. And he began forging Luca the moment the boy could walk. A chill slid along Ava's spine. Forging him how? Rosa lowered her gaze to the cup in her hands, and her voice dropped. "Luca learned to shoot before he learned to ride a bicycle. He learned how to hit before he learned how to read. Every time the boy cried, Don Antonio locked him in a dark room all night. Every time the boy showed weakness, there was punishment." She paused, eyes shifting toward the window. "The scar in Luca's eyebrow. Have you seen it?" Ava nodded. She had noticed it. A thin line cutting across his left brow, almost invisible if you didn't look closely. Luca was 12. There was a meeting with partners, and Don Antonio ordered the boy to sit still and watch. But Luca saw one of the men lying about the numbers, and he spoke up, called out the deception in front of everyone. Rosa shook her head, her mouth tightening. Don Antonio slapped him right there at the table. The ring on his hand cut into the skin. Blood ran down Luca's face, but the boy didn't cry, didn't say a word. He only stood, bowed his head, and left the room. Ava felt her chest constrict. She pictured a 12-year-old with blood on his face, struck by his own father in front of a room full of men, forbidden to cry. She thought of the scars she'd seen across Luca's back and chest that night by the window, and wondered how many of them had come from the father who was supposed to love him. Don Antonio said that scar would remind Luca that respect had to be earned through strength, not words. Rosa looked at Ava, her eyes shining. But I think it reminded Luca of something else, that even the closest people can leave the deepest wounds. Silence moved between them, heavy with truths left unspoken. "He was never allowed to be a child," Rosa continued, her voice gentler now. "But you, Ava, you make him smile. I can see it. For the first time in many years, I saw something alive in his eyes when he spoke about you." Ava didn't know how to respond to that. She only sat there, looking down at the books around her, and for the first time she didn't see the ruthless Mafia boss anymore. She saw a child robbed of boyhood, a man forged into a weapon, and a heart trying to beat beneath armor made of steel. On the 5th day in the penthouse, Luca appeared at Ava's door just as she was waking up. He was wearing black joggers and a fitted gray t-shirt, nothing like the perfect suits she was used to seeing. He looked younger, more approachable, and dangerous in another way she didn't dare name. "Put on something comfortable," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Meet me downstairs in 15 minutes. Then he was gone before she could ask why. Downstairs turned out to be a private gym Ava hadn't known existed, directly beneath the penthouse. Fully equipped with everything from treadmills to a weight area, from a sparring mat to a space she recognized immediately as a shooting range. Luca stood in the middle of the room beside a small table with a handgun laid on top. "That night at the diner, you didn't hesitate," he said when she came closer. "You acted on instinct. But instinct won't save you forever. You need skill. You want to teach me to shoot?" "I want to teach you to defend yourself," Luca corrected. "The gun is only one part. First, you need to know how to get out of an attack without a weapon." They started with basics. How to stand so she kept her balance. How to turn so she could slip a strike. How to use an opponent's strength against them. Luca was patient in a way that surprised her, explaining each step, correcting each posture, never showing irritation when she got it wrong. "When someone grabs your wrist from the front," he said, and his hand suddenly closed around her wrist, "don't try to yank away. You won't be strong enough. Instead, rotate your wrist toward their thumb, the weakest point of the grip, and pull out." Ava did it, and her wrist slid free more easily than she expected. "Good." Luca nodded, and she felt a small warmth spread in her chest at the sound of that praise. Again, they practiced for hours. How to break out of a hold from behind, how to strike the vulnerable points on a body, how to run and hide if she had to. Sweat soaked Ava's shirt, her muscles aching from unfamiliar movements. But she didn't complain. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was learning how not to be a victim. Then came the gun. Luca brought her to the range and placed the handgun in her hand with the care of someone handing her something valuable. "This is a Glock 19. Light, easy to use, a good fit for your hand." He stood beside her, his voice serious. "Rule 1, always treat a gun as if it's loaded. Rule 2, never point the barrel at anything you don't intend to shoot. Rule 3, your finger doesn't touch the trigger until you're ready to fire." Ava held the gun, startled by how much heavier it was than she'd imagined, how much colder. "Raise it. Aim at the target." She did, but her hands shook, and the barrel wavered without stopping. Then Luca stepped in behind her, his body aligned close behind hers, not fully touching, but near enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. His hands came up, closing over hers, adjusting the placement of her fingers on the grip. His breath was warm by her ear when he spoke, low and so close she could feel every vibration. "Relax your shoulders. Breathe. Focus on the target, not on the gun." Ava's heart went wild, and she knew it had nothing to do with the weapon in her hand anymore. His scent surrounded her, soap and sweat, and something that belonged only to him. She could feel his chest nearly brushing her back, his strong fingers enclosing her hand. "When you're ready, take a breath in, let half of it out, then squeeze the trigger. Slow, don't jerk." Ava did it. Inhale, exhale halfway, squeeze. The shot cracked through the enclosed space, and on the target 10 meters away, a hole appeared, not a bullseye, but not too far off. "Good." Luca's voice was still right at her ear, and he didn't step away. Again, they stood like that for a stretch of time Ava couldn't count, him behind her, guiding every shot, and her trying to focus on the target instead of the overwhelming fact of him. When he finally stepped back, she almost felt the loss of it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, turning to look at him. "Teaching me all of this." Luca looked at her, his storm gray eyes holding something she didn't dare name. "Because I can't be with you all the time," he said, his voice low and sincere. "And because you deserve to never have to feel helpless again." On the 6th day, when Ava stepped out of her room in the late afternoon, she caught the rich scent of garlic blooming from the kitchen. She followed it and froze where she stood at the sight in front of her. Luca Moretti, the most powerful Mafia boss in New York, was standing at the stove in a white apron, wooden spoon in hand, stirring a pot of sauce that bubbled and burped. He'd taken off his suit jacket and rolled his shirt sleeves up to his elbows, exposing lean, strong forearms inked with tattoos she'd only glimpsed in the gym. "Do you know how to cook?" he asked without turning around, as if he had eyes in the back of his head. "Basic, enough not to starve." "Then come here." I'll teach you how to make spaghetti carbonara using my mother's recipe. Ava hesitated for a second, then walked over to him. Luca's kitchen was as big as her entire old apartment, with white marble countertops and high-end appliances she'd only ever seen on cooking shows. The ingredients were already laid out: eggs, pecorino romano, guanciale, fresh black pepper, and a heap of dried spaghetti. Real carbonara doesn't have cream, Luca said, handing her a bowl and a few eggs. Just eggs, cheese, and fat from the pork. That's how my mother taught it, and she learned it from my grandmother in Rome. They worked side by side in an easy silence. Ava whisked eggs and cheese the way Luca showed her while he fried the guanciale until it was crisp and the rendered fat ran clear. The kitchen filled with warmth and scent, and Ava realized this was the first time since she'd come here that she felt calm. Now comes the hardest part. Luca leaned over her shoulder, checking the egg mixture. You have to pour the eggs into the pasta the moment it's lifted from boiling water, but with the heat off. Too hot and the eggs scramble. Too cool and they won't cook. He guided her step by step, and when she poured the egg mixture into the pasta and began to toss it, she stared down into the pot, bewildered. It looks like a mess. Keep mixing. Trust me. She did, and like magic, the mixture slowly transformed into a glossy, silky sauce, shining as it coated each strand. I did it, Ava blurted, and the sound that came out of her throat was laughter, something she didn't think she remembered how to make anymore. She turned to Luca, eyes bright, and caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't decode. Something soft, something almost entranced. They ate dinner beside the windows overlooking the city, Manhattan lights blinking like millions of stars beneath their feet. Red wine, scented candles, and the best pasta Ava had ever tasted. She didn't know whether this was dinner with a captor or a date, and the most frightening thing was that she wasn't sure she cared about the difference anymore. Tell me about Sophie, Luca said suddenly, his voice gentle. Not about the illness or the bills. Tell me about who she was. Ava set her fork down, surprised by the question, even more surprised by how much she wanted to answer it. Sophie liked to draw, she began, her voice softening with memory. She could sit for hours with a sketchbook, drawing everything she saw. Birds on the window ledge, people walking by, buildings. She dreamed of becoming an artist, of having her own exhibition in a gallery in Soho. Ava smiled, a sad smile. She always said that one day she'd paint my portrait and hang it somewhere people could see it, so I wouldn't be invisible anymore. Silence passed between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was simply respect for what had been lost. She would be proud of you, Luca said, his tone certain as a vow, for the way you fought for her, for the way you kept living even when it hurt. Ava felt her eyes sting, but no tears fell. Instead, she placed her hand on the table, and Luca, the ruthless Mafia boss, the man who wasn't allowed to be weak, set his hand over hers, warm, steady, like an anchor in rough water. They sat that way in silence, hand in hand, watching the city breathe beneath them. And Ava wondered when this gilded cage had begun to feel like home. The 7th day began with a tension Ava could feel in the air, like something sharp waiting to snap. Luca was up earlier than usual, his face sealed shut like a steel door, his gray eyes back to the coldness she had seen on that first night at the diner. He kept making calls in Italian, his voice tight as a wire stretched to the breaking point, and the bodyguards moved in and out of the penthouse more than normal. Rosa was quieter, too, drifting through the rooms like a worried ghost. What is it? Ava asked when she finally caught Luca alone in the hallway that afternoon. He stopped and looked at her with an expression she couldn't decode. Viktor Kozlov wants to meet. Negotiate. His voice was flat, without emotion. Tonight. Negotiate? He tried to kill you. That's how my world works, Luca replied, a bitter smile flickering across his mouth. Today they shoot at each other. Tomorrow they sit at the same table and divide territory, as long as both sides still have something to lose. Ava wanted to say something. She wanted to stop him from going, but she knew she didn't have the right. She was only a waitress he was protecting, not someone with a voice and decisions that meant life or death for him. Luca seemed to read her thoughts, because he stepped closer and lifted his hand as if he was going to touch her cheek, then stopped halfway. Marcus will be here with you, and 3 others. Don't leave the penthouse for any reason. His voice dropped, softer. If anything happens, Marcus will get you somewhere safe. Do you hear me? Will you come back? The question slipped out before Ava could stop it, and she realized with a jolt that she was truly worried about him. Not because he was the only thing standing between her and Viktor Kozlov, but because she didn't want to lose him. Luca looked at her for a long moment, the storm in his eyes easing for a heartbeat. I'll always come back to you. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Ava alone in the hallway with her heart pounding out of rhythm and the sense that something terrible was coming. The hours that followed moved like a slow torture of worry. Ava tried to read, but she couldn't focus. She tried to watch television, but every sound made her flinch. Rosa had gone to her own room, and the penthouse sank into darkness except for the city light filtering in through the glass. Marcus and the other bodyguards were downstairs, guarding the entrances. She was alone. The clock struck 11 o'clock at night when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, and her heart stopped when she read the words. Stay away from the windows. Lock yourself in the master bedroom. Don't open the door for anyone except Marcus. Right now. Ava didn't know who the message was from. She didn't know if it was a trap or a real warning, but the instinct Luca had trained into her in the gym flared awake. She stood and moved fast and silent toward the hallway that led to Luca's bedroom. She'd made it only halfway when she heard it. The elevator stopping, the doors opening, footsteps, many footsteps. Not the leather shoes of Marcus, or the bodyguards she'd grown used to. These steps were heavier, more hurried, and with them came whispered words in a language she recognized instantly. Russian, or Ukrainian. Ava's heart slammed in her chest. She pressed herself to the wall, breathing as lightly as she could, and looked around for somewhere to hide. How did they get in? Where was Marcus? Where were the guards? Then she heard a voice she recognized, one of Luca's bodyguards, the one named Tommy she'd seen standing watch in the hallway many times. She's in here somewhere. Find her. Fast. We don't have much time before Moretti comes back. A traitor. It felt like someone had poured ice water into Ava's veins. Tommy had sold Luca out. He'd let Victor's men into the penthouse. And now they were looking for her. She didn't think. She ran. Barefoot on the wood floor, Ava sprinted toward Luca's bedroom, her heart pounding like a hammer, her breath so ragged she was afraid they'd hear it. She shoved the door open, slipped inside, and locked it the instant footsteps began moving into the hallway. Search the rooms. She has to be here somewhere. The voice came closer. A door was thrown open. Then another. Ava swept her eyes across the room in the dark, searching for something, anything that could help her. And she remembered what Luca had taught her in the gym. She remembered the nightstand drawer he'd opened when he'd been explaining security in the penthouse. She lunged for it, yanked the drawer open, and her hand closed around the ice-cold metal of a gun. Outside, the footsteps stopped right in front of her door. Ava's hand tightened around the pistol grip, the metal so cold it felt like the only anchor keeping her from dropping into a chasm of panic. She checked it fast, the way Luca had taught her. The magazine was loaded. The safety was off. The Glock 19 sat neatly in her hand, familiar after hours of practice in the gym. But this time there was no paper target, no Luca behind her, guiding. This time it was real. A knock sounded at the door, slow and threatening. Ms. Mitchell. A voice carried through the wooden door, a man's voice with a heavy Eastern European accent she recognized instantly. Victor Kozlov. I know you're in there. We don't have to make this difficult. Open the door, and I promise I won't hurt you. Ava didn't answer. She backed toward the foot of the bed, keeping distance from the door, the gun raised and ready. Her breaths were shallow and quick, but she forced herself to focus, to remember every word Luca had said. Breathe in, breathe out, focus. You know, at first I didn't care about you, Victor went on, his tone conversational, as if they were sharing tea, just a poor waitress in the wrong place at the wrong time. But then you had to jump in and save Moretti, had to turn yourself into my problem. A low laugh rolled through the door. And now you're the only card I've got to play against that stubborn little boy. Go away. Ava's voice came out steadier than she expected. I've got a gun, and I know how to use it. Silence held for a few seconds. Then Victor laughed louder. Moretti's gun. You think he'd leave a weapon in his bedroom for a waitress to find. Charming. But have you ever shot anyone, Ms. Mitchell? Shot a real person, flesh and bone, not a paper target in a training room. Ava's hand trembled slightly, but she didn't lower the gun. This is your last chance. Victor's voice turned cold, the fake friendliness draining away. Open the door, or we break in. And if we have to break in, I'm not promising gentle anymore. Ava heard sounds outside, metal scraping against metal. They were working the lock. She closed her eyes for 1 second and thought of Sophie, of her sister's smile, of the promise that one day she wouldn't be invisible anymore. She thought of Luca, of the way he looked at her as if she were something precious, of the way he said she deserved to never feel helpless again. She wasn't a victim. Not anymore. When she opened her eyes, the fear was still there, but it didn't control her now. The lock snapped. The door handle turned. Ava took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The gunshot detonated inside the tight room, and the bullet tore straight through the wooden door. Outside, a scream burst out, a man shouting in Russian, then the sound of a body going down. "That bitch shot me." Another voice. Not Victor. "She shot through the door." Ava fired again. Then again, aiming at different spots on the door. The wood split, debris flying. Suddenly, the sharp wail of police sirens cut through the silence of the night. Closer than expected. "Cops," one of the men cursed. "We have to go." "Fall back!" Victor yelled, the calm gone now. "Fall back! Now!" Footsteps retreated. The elevator. Then silence. Ava stood there with the gun still raised, her whole body shaking so hard she thought she might collapse. She didn't know how much time passed. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour, when sound rose again from outside. The elevator. Footsteps. A voice calling. "Ava, Ava." Luca's voice, panicked in a way she'd never heard before, tore through the silence. "I'm here." She tried to shout, but her voice came out a raw whisper. "I'm here." A fist hammered the door. "Ava, open up. Are you hurt? Ava." She crossed to the door, riddled with bullet holes on unsteady legs, turned the lock, and pulled it open. Luca stood there, his shirt wrinkled, hair fallen loose, gray eyes wild with a fear she never thought she'd see on the face of a Mafia boss. Then he surged toward her, his arms wrapped around her like she was the most precious thing on earth, like he would never let go. Ava felt the strength in his hold, the heat of his body, his heartbeat slamming hard beneath his chest. She let the gun fall, heard metal strike the wood floor, and finally allowed herself to break. "You're safe," Luca whispered into her hair, his voice shaking. "You're safe. I'm here. You're safe." She didn't realize she was crying until she felt his shirt soak at her shoulder. "I shot them," she said, her voice breaking. "I shot through the door. I know." Luca pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hand lifting her chin. "You fought. You survived. You're so strong I can't believe it. I was so scared." "I know. I was scared too." He rested his forehead against hers, his hot breath mixing with hers. "When I got the message that someone had gotten in, when I couldn't reach Marcus, I thought..." His voice caught. "I thought I'd lost you." Ava looked into those storm-gray eyes, and in this moment, in a room thick with the smell of gunpowder and a door torn to pieces, she understood that something had changed forever. Between them, and inside her, Luca wouldn't let her out of his sight that entire night. After Marcus was found unconscious downstairs, drugged by Tommy. After the loyal bodyguards were summoned, and the building was sealed. After Tommy was taken away with terrified eyes and a fate Ava didn't want to know, Luca brought her into his bedroom and closed the door behind them. "You're sleeping here tonight," he said, his voice leaving no room for refusal. "Your room. The door is damaged, and I need to know you're safe." Ava was too exhausted to argue. She let him lead her to the enormous bed with charcoal gray sheets. She let him pull the blanket up over her, and she closed her eyes, hoping sleep would carry her away from this place, away from this horrific night. But sleep didn't come. Every time she shut her eyes, she heard the knock at the door. Victor's voice, the gunshot exploding from her hands. She opened her eyes in the dark and realized Luca was lying beside her, on top of the covers, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. He wasn't asleep. His gray eyes stared up at the ceiling, his face only a blur of angles in the dim city light slipping through the windows. "Aren't you sleeping?" Her voice came out rough in the night. "Can't." He turned to look at her. "And you?" "Me neither." Silence passed between them. Not heavy, just the silence of two people who'd been through hell and survived. "Are you afraid?" Luca asked softly. "Living in this world?" "Yes," Ava answered honestly. "Terrified. Every day since I walked into this penthouse." "You can leave." His voice tightened, as if the words hurt to say. "I can arrange a new identity for you. A new life somewhere far away, where Victor can't find you, where no one knows who you are." Ava turned onto her side, facing him in the dark. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out so fast it was almost a harsh breath. "No, I don't. I never have." He turned too, and now they lay facing each other, close enough that Ava could have counted his lashes if there had been more light. "But I also don't want you in danger because of me. I don't want you to have to shoot through a door to stay alive. I don't want you to become what my world forces you to become. What if I want to stay?" He didn't answer right away. In the dark, she saw his jaw clench, his throat moving as he swallowed hard. "Why would you want that? You've seen my world. Violence, betrayal, death. There's nothing worth staying for." "You..." The two words hung between them, and Ava felt her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it in the quiet of the room. Luca drew in a sharp breath, as if she'd just driven a knife into his chest. You shouldn't say things like that. His voice was hoarse, taut with something he was fighting to keep contained. You don't know who I really am, what I've done, the crimes I've committed. I know you're the man who went to a rundown diner at 3 o'clock in the morning to find a memory of his father, Ava whispered. I know you're the child who wasn't allowed to cry when his own father hit him until he bled. I know you're the man who paid all my debts without asking for anything back. The man who taught me how to defend myself so I wouldn't be helpless anymore. The man who came running back here like you'd lost your mind when you thought something had happened to me. Ava, I know you've killed people. You've done terrible things. But I also know you're not the monster you think you are. She lifted her hand and touched his cheek in the dark, feeling warm skin and the hard line of his jaw beneath her fingers. I know enough to decide that I want to stay. Luca closed his eyes at the feel of her hand on his face, as if that touch was too much, too sweet for a man used to violence and pain. I'm in love with you, he whispered, and the words came out like a confession, like a sin he couldn't hide anymore. I don't know when it happened. Maybe the moment you threw yourself in front of that bullet for me. Maybe when you looked at me and didn't shake. Maybe when you laughed in the kitchen with flour on your face. I don't know, but I'm in love with you, Ava Mitchell. And that scares me more than anything Viktor Kozlov could ever do. Ava felt tears rise, but not from sadness, from something else, something warm and vast, so big she didn't know if her heart could hold it. I'm in love with you too, she whispered, and I'm scared too. But I'm willing to be scared with you. Luca opened his eyes, and in the dark she saw something in those storm eyes break. Walls he'd built his whole life collapsing in a single moment. He leaned toward her, stopping when their mouths were only a breath apart. Tell me to stop. His voice shook with restraint. If you don't want this, tell me to stop. Instead of answering, Ava pulled him down. Their first kiss wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, carrying all the fear and longing they'd held back for days. His mouth was hot on hers. His hand slid into her hair, and Ava felt like she was sinking and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. And Ava knew that no matter how insane the outside world became, no matter how terrifying Viktor Kozlov was, she had found something she hadn't known she'd been searching for her whole life, a place to belong. The next morning, Ava woke up in Luca's arms. He was still asleep, his face softened by sleep, younger and less dangerous than he looked when he was awake. She lay there for a while, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, feeling the warmth of his body wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. But that peace didn't last. When Luca opened his eyes, something in his look told Ava at once that he was hiding something. He watched her with eyes full of pain, as if he were bracing for a blow he knew would destroy everything they had just built. There's something I need to tell you. His voice was rough with sleep and something heavier. About your father. Ava went still. Her father. The man who had abandoned her and her mother when she was 8, vanished into the night and never returned. Her mother had always said he was a bad man, violent and unreliable. Ava had grown up with resentment toward a ghost. Your father didn't leave, Luca said, and each word fell like a stone into water. He was killed, 19 years ago. The room tilted. Ava sat up fast, her heart bucking, staring at Luca with disbelieving eyes. What? Luca sat up too. But he didn't touch her. He kept his distance, as if he knew what he was about to say would put an abyss between them. When I had someone look into you, they found information about your father, Daniel Mitchell. He worked for my father, collecting debts, enforcing, dirty work in Little Italy. Luca paused and drew a slow breath. He stole money. Small amounts over months, but my father found out. No. Ava shook her head, refusing to believe what she was hearing. No, my mother said he left. She said, she lied to protect you. Luca held her gaze without flinching, without denying it. My father gave the order to deal with him. In our world, that's a death sentence for betrayal. Daniel Mitchell was killed the night he tried to run with the money. Ava felt as if all the air had been ripped from her lungs. 19 years. 19 years living with hatred for a father she believed had abandoned her. 19 years her mother carrying that horrific truth alone. And now the man she loved was telling her that his father was the one who had ordered her father's death. Why are you telling me this? Her voice broke, caught between fury and grief. Why now? Because you deserve the truth, Luca said, his voice taut with emotion he was trying to hold back. All of it. I won't build love on a foundation of lies. If you choose to stay with me, You have to know exactly what you're choosing." Ava got out of bed and walked to the window, turning her back on him. The city sprawled below, millions of lives continuing as if her world hadn't just flipped over again. She thought of her father, not the resentful ghost she'd built in her mind, but the real man. A thief, maybe. A bad man, the way her mother had said. She thought of her mother, of the nights she cried alone when she thought Ava was asleep. She thought of Sophie, who had never known her father. And she thought of Luca, the man behind her, waiting for sentence, accepting whatever she decided. "Did you know?" she asked without turning around. "Before you met me, did you know who my father was?" "No. I only knew when the report came back, after the night you shot through the door." Silence. "If I'd known earlier, I would have told you then too. You deserve the truth, no matter how much it hurts." Ava turned back to him. Luca sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, storm-gray eyes filled with pain, as he looked at her like he'd already accepted losing her. He looked like the 12-year-old boy Rosa had described, blood on his face, robbed of everything and forbidden to cry. "You're not your father," she said, and she saw him blink in surprise. "You're not the one who ordered my father killed. You're the man who told me the truth when you could have hidden it forever. But his blood runs in me. His guilt isn't yours to carry." Ava stepped closer, and when she stood in front of him, she saw tears gathered in those storm eyes, tears he would never let fall. "I spent 19 years hating a ghost. I don't want to waste any more time hating. Ava, I choose you." She took his hand and pressed it to her chest so he could feel the heartbeat that was beating for him. "I choose you, Luca Moretti. Not because I don't know who you are, but because I do." 2 days after the truth about her father came out, Luca offered to take Ava to meet his mother. The offer shocked her. She hadn't expected a Mafia boss to want to introduce her to family, as if they were an ordinary couple dating. But Luca looked at her with serious eyes and said that if she had chosen to stay with him, she needed to know the people who mattered in his life, and no one mattered more than Caterina Moretti. Brighton Beach was a completely different world from the Upper East Side. The streets bustled with shops displaying signs in both English and Italian, the scent of toasted bread and espresso drifting through the air, and elderly people chatting on benches facing the ocean. Luca guided Ava through narrow alleys to a modest brownstone house, nothing about it suggesting it belonged to the mother of one of the most powerful men in New York. Caterina Moretti opened the door before they could knock, as if she'd been waiting for a long time. She was a small woman with silver hair pinned neatly up and gray eyes exactly like her son's, but warmer, softer. When she saw Ava, her face brightened into a radiant smile, and she stepped forward and hugged Ava as if they had known each other forever. "Finally," she said, her voice carrying the same gentle Italian lilt as Rosa's. "Finally, my stubborn son brings home a woman worthy of him." Luca stood there with an awkwardness Ava had never seen in him, as if he'd turned back into a little boy in front of his mother. Caterina patted his cheek, said a few words in Italian Ava didn't understand, then shooed him out to the backyard, on the excuse that she wanted to speak privately with Ava. Inside, the house was warm and crowded with memory. Family photographs lined the walls, carefully kept antiques sat on shelves, and somewhere in the kitchen the scent of tomato sauce bubbled and simmered. Caterina led Ava into the living room, pressed her gently onto a deep red velvet sofa, and brought out a tray of homemade cookies. "Rosa called me after the night you shot through the door," she said as she poured tea for them both. "She told me you were brave like a lion, and that my son looks at you like you are the sun." Ava felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just listen." Caterina sat across from her, gray eyes watching her with understanding. "I know the world you are stepping into. I lived in it for 40 years with Antonio, and now I watch my son carry that same weight. It is not an easy life. I know, but you stayed. It wasn't a question. Even after seeing the violence, even after learning the truth about your father, even after nearly dying for being beside Luca." Ava nodded, not knowing how to explain a decision she sometimes didn't fully understand herself. Caterina set her tea down and leaned forward, taking Ava's hands. "When Luca was small, I begged Antonio to let us leave. Leave this life. Leave the violence. Give our son a normal childhood." Her eyes shimmered with painful memory, but Antonio said men like him were not allowed to retire. He said the empire was our legacy, Luca's destiny, and I was too weak to fight. "That isn't your fault. Maybe not," Caterina sighed. "But what I want to tell you is this. I failed to protect my son from his father. I watched Luca be forged into a weapon and I could do nothing. But you," her grip tightened around Ava's hands, "you have done what I could not. You touched the human part of him that Antonio tried to kill. Rosa says she saw Luca truly smile for the first time in many years. Smile because of you. Ava felt her throat tighten. My son is used to being surrounded by people who fear him or want something from him, Katerina continued. But you threw yourself in front of a bullet for him and asked for nothing. You knew who he was and still chose to stay. That is something Luca has never had in his life. I love him, Ava whispered, and the words came as naturally as breathing. I know. Katerina smiled, and the smile was warm as spring sunlight. And because of that, you are family. Not because my son claims it, but because I claim it. She stood and drew Ava into her small but steady embrace. Welcome home, Ava. You are not alone anymore. And as Ava stood there in the arms of the woman she had just met for the first time, she felt something she had lost when Sophie died. Something she had thought she would never have again. A sense of belonging. A sense of home. 3 days after meeting Katerina, Luca received word that Viktor Kozlov had agreed to one final meeting. Not negotiations like before, but an ending, one way or another. Ava watched him prepare that morning, slipping into a suit as black as night, checking his gun before holstering it, and she felt the familiar fear squeeze her heart until it hurt. The last time he went to meet Viktor, she had almost died in this penthouse. This time, she didn't know what was waiting. Do you have to go alone? She asked, standing in the bedroom doorway, watching him knot his tie in the mirror. Not alone. Marcus and 12 men will be with me. Luca turned to her, and something in his eyes made her want to cry. But you can't come. Not because I don't trust you to protect yourself, but because if you're there, I won't be able to focus on anything except keeping you safe. He stepped closer, lifted his hand, and brushed her cheek with a gentleness she still wasn't used to seeing from a Mafia boss. This time will be different, he said, his voice certain. Viktor has lost too much. His people are walking away every day. Moscow pulled support after the penthouse attack failed. He has no choice left but to negotiate or die. Will you kill him? Luca was quiet for a moment, as if weighing the answer. I'll do whatever is necessary to end this, he said at last. But if Viktor is willing to leave, disappear, never come back, I'll give him that chance. He tipped his head, looking at her with an expression she'd learned to read over these weeks. Because of you. Because you make me want to be a better man. He kissed her, slow and gentle, as if they had a whole lifetime ahead of them. Then he left, and Ava was alone in the penthouse, with her heart aching and a silent prayer on her lips. The hours that followed were torture. Ava paced the living room, unable to sit still, unable to read, unable to do anything but stare at her phone and wait. Rosa tried to get her to eat, but the food tasted like ash in her mouth. She thought of everything that could go wrong, of Viktor setting another trap, of losing Luca just when she had finally found him. The clock struck 8 o'clock in the evening when her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Boss is on his way back. Viktor agreed. It's over. Ava didn't realize she was crying until she felt tears hit her hand. She stood there in the middle of the luxurious living room and cried like she had been saved all over again. When the elevator doors opened and Luca stepped out, he looked exhausted, but whole. No blood on his shirt, no fresh wounds. He saw her standing there with her face wet, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms as if he had been waiting for this moment all day. Viktor will leave New York tomorrow morning, he whispered into her hair. He's taking a sum of money and a new identity. Disappearing to somewhere I don't care about, as long as it isn't here. You didn't kill him. No. Luca pulled back to look into her eyes. Because of you. Because I don't want more blood on my hands when I come back to you. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the penthouse that had once been her gilded cage, but now was starting to feel like home. Then Luca let her go, reached into the pocket of his suit jacket, and drew out a small black velvet box. I've got something for you. Ava's heart stuttered when she saw the box. It was too small to be a ring, but big enough to hold something that mattered. She lifted the lid, and inside, resting on white velvet, was a gold key hanging from a delicate chain. This is the key to everything I own, Luca said, his voice low and serious. This penthouse, the house in the Hamptons, the accounts, the safes, all of it. Ava looked up, not understanding. If you choose to stay, Luca continued, taking her hand and placing the box in her palm, then this is the symbol of that. You won't be the one being protected anymore. Not a guest, not a prisoner. You'll be my partner, equal, in everything. And if I choose to leave, pain flashed in his gray eyes, but he didn't shy away. If you choose to leave, I'll give you money, a new identity, anywhere you want to go in this world, and you still keep the key. He smiled. the saddest smile she had ever seen. As a reminder that somewhere in this city, there's someone who loves you enough to give you freedom. And if you ever need anything, anytime, that key will open every door. Ava looked down at the key in her hand, then up at the man standing in front of her. The ruthless Mafia boss was looking at her with wounded eyes, waiting for a decision that could break him. "This is your choice," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Completely yours. I won't keep you if you want to go. I won't resent you if you choose a safer life. I only want you happy, whatever that means." Ava closed her fingers around the key, feeling the cold metal warming under her skin, and she knew this decision would shape the rest of her life. Ava stood there with the gold key resting in her palm, and she thought about everything that had happened since the fateful night at Sullivan's diner. She thought of the girl who had stood behind the counter at 3 o'clock in the morning, wiping the same stain again and again, exhausted and invisible, not knowing her life was about to change forever. That girl had lost too much. Her parents, her sister, her hope. She had grown used to merely existing instead of truly living. That girl would have chosen safety. She would have chosen to disappear into a new life somewhere far away, where no one knew her and no one could hurt her. But that girl didn't exist anymore. The woman standing in this penthouse, with a gold key in her hand and a Mafia boss waiting for her verdict, wasn't that invisible girl anymore. She had fired through a door to protect herself. She had faced the painful truth about her father and chosen forgiveness instead of hatred. She had been welcomed by a mother into a family as if she had always belonged there. And she had loved, truly loved. For the first time in her life, Ava looked up at Luca, the man standing in front of her with wounded gray eyes, waiting for her to destroy him or save him. She saw everything he was. The monster the world feared, the child starved of tenderness, still searching for warmth, the man who had learned how to love again because a waitress had thrown herself in front of a bullet for him. She saw violence and gentleness, power and loneliness, crime and redemption, all woven together inside the man she had chosen from the moment she dragged him down beneath the table. The girl who walked into that diner that night, Ava began, her voice steadier than it had ever been in her life. She wanted safety. She wanted ordinary. She wanted to be invisible so no one could hurt her. She saw Luca draw in a sharp breath, his shoulders tightening as if he were bracing for the blow. But she doesn't exist anymore. Ava stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth coming off his body. You changed her. This life changed her. And the woman standing in front of you now, she doesn't want safety if safety means losing you. She doesn't want ordinary if ordinary means going back to that invisible life. She doesn't want to disappear, because for the first time, she has a reason to stay. Ava lifted her hand and placed it on Luca's chest, right over the heart pounding hard beneath the fabric of his suit. "I choose you, Luca Moretti," she said, and each word was a vow. "I choose the monster and the man, the violence and the gentleness, the danger and the protection. Everything you are, everything you've done, everything you will do. I choose all of it." Something broke in Luca's storm-gray eyes. The last walls he had held up his entire life collapsing completely. He looked at her as if she were a miracle. Light in the dark. Something he couldn't believe he deserved. "Are you sure?" His voice was hoarse, shaking with emotion he wasn't trying to hide anymore. "Because if you stay, I'll never let you go. I won't be able to. I don't want to go." Ava smiled, the first smile that felt truly hers in years. "I've found home." Luca lifted his hand, took the key from her palm, and fastened the chain around her neck. The cold metal touched her skin, then slowly warmed, as if it were settling into its new home. He looked at the key resting against her chest, then lifted his gaze to her eyes, and she saw something in that look she would remember for the rest of her life. Love, reverence, belonging. "I love you, Ava Mitchell," he said, his voice like a vow spoken in a church. "I'll spend every remaining day of my life protecting you, cherishing you, being worthy of you." "I love you too," she whispered, "and I'm ready for whatever comes next." Then he kissed her. This kiss was different from every kiss before it. It wasn't desperate or hungry. It was slow and deep, a promise sealed with lips, a contract that didn't need a signature. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, Ava knew her life would never be easy. There would be danger. There would be violence. There would be nights she stayed awake waiting for him to come home. But she also knew she would never be invisible again. 6 months after the night, Ava wore the gold key around her neck. She sat in Luca's office, facing a computer screen filled with financial reports that 6 months ago she wouldn't have understood a single line of. Now she read them the way she used to read Sullivan's diner menus, fluent and effortless. She had learned. She had changed. She had become someone she never imagined she could become. The gold key still rested against her chest, warmed by her skin, a constant reminder of the decision that had reshaped her life. She was studying criminal justice at night now, an irony she and Luca often laughed about whenever she brought her books home. She had learned how to read contracts, understand the law, negotiate with powerful men she once wouldn't have dared meet in the eye. Luca looked up from his desk, caught her gaze, and his smile still made her heart race the way it had the first time. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, setting his pen down. "About the night I dragged a Mafia boss under a table in a rundown diner at 3 o'clock in the morning." Ava smiled. "About how that decision changed everything." Luca stood, came around the desk, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "The best decision of my life," he whispered. "Mine too." Luca's phone buzzed. Another work call, another problem that needed solving. There were always new problems in their world, always danger waiting somewhere. But they faced it together, like true partners, like equals. Ava looked out through the glass, where New York City stretched below like a carpet of light. She thought about the girl who had stood behind the counter at Sullivan's diner, wiping the same stain again and again, exhausted and invisible. That girl had lost her parents at 19. She had raised her sister alone through cancer. She had buried the only sibling she had and believed she would never have a reason to truly live again. That girl wouldn't recognize the woman Ava had become. Confident, strong, loved. But Ava hoped that if that girl could see her now, she would be proud. Proud she hadn't given up. Proud she had thrown herself in front of a bullet for a stranger. Proud she had chosen love over fear. Sophie would be proud. Ava knew it. Her sister had once dreamed of painting Ava's portrait and hanging it where people could see it, so her sister wouldn't be invisible anymore. Now Ava didn't need that portrait. She had found someone who saw her, truly saw her. Not for who she was or what she had, but simply because she was herself. Sometimes the most beautiful lives are the ones we never plan. Sometimes love comes from the places we least expect. From a rundown diner at 3 o'clock in the morning. From a Mafia boss with storm eyes. From a bullet that almost stole her life, and instead gave her a new one. Sometimes courage doesn't mean feeling no fear, but feeling fear and still acting, still loving, still staying. Ava Mitchell was not invisible anymore. She was seen, loved, alive, and that, maybe, was the greatest miracle of all. Ava and Luca's story ends here, but the lesson it leaves behind still echoes. It is a lesson about courage, about daring to love even when you are afraid, about never giving up hope even when life pushes you to the deepest edge. It is also a lesson about forgiveness, about accepting someone's true self with all their scars and sins, about finding light in the darkest places. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Do you believe true love can come from the most unexpected places? We would truly love to hear what you feel, from the deepest part of your heart. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, because every one of your stories is a precious source of inspiration for us. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button to support our channel. Please share this video with the people you love, the people who are also searching for meaningful stories in life. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the moving stories we bring you every day. Thank you for taking the time to listen all the way to the final moment. We wish every one of you watching this video good health, a life filled with joy and happiness each day, and a spirit that stays calm and at peace. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, you are never truly invisible. There is always someone out there who sees you and loves you. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.